The My Lai massacre took place on March 16, 1968, when Charlie Company entered the village of My Lai. They entered the village and killed NVAs in response to an information reading that the village was swarming with Viet Cong. That's it.
That's a bunch of bull. Well, kind of. The My Lai massacre goes largely unmentioned in American textbooks. We often criticize Nazis and Soviets for their war crimes, but overlook American war crimes. Understandably, self-criticism is difficult, but there's nothing that Americans love more than criticizing their own country, at least nowadays. The My Lai massacre was a horrid act backed by American insolence that resulted in the lives of 504 Vietnamese civilians. The atrocities committed by Americans transcend war crimes and were explicitly evil. The My Lai massacre's absence in American textbooks was due to the details in which American soldiers engaged with, protection from the national government, and the humanitarian idea that the U.S. military could never do any harm to another country's civilians. According to the Journal of American History, Volume 94, Number 1, 2007, pages 154 to 162, March in 1968, Charlie Company was struggling to stay alive in Vietnam as 4 members had been killed and 38 had been wounded, mostly by mines, booby traps, or snipers. Charlie Company was frustrated that the enemy was avoiding open battle, preventing Charlie Company from retaliating. 2 days before the massacre, a popular sergeant was killed by a mine. The My Lai operation was to avenge Charlie Company's fallen comrades. Viet Cong's 48th Battalion was said to be located in Sun Mai, where My Lai was. Sun Mai was also known as a Viet Cong stronghold. Americans called My Lai Pinkville, which would soon be shorthand for communist territory. At 7:24 a.m., artillery struck My Lai with bombardments, and from 7:30 to 7:47 a.m., Charlie Company was dropped into the fight by helicopters. Intelligence was incorrect as there was no resistance, and My Lai was full of villagers. More information regarding the Journal of American History states that Calley ordered his men to shoot the villagers at point-blank range, and when some refused, Calley did it himself. Soldiers tossed explosives into bunkers where some villagers remained inside. Soldiers killed a Buddhist monk and threw grenades into a well to contaminate the water supply. Soldiers killed water buffalo, ducks, and pigs, as well as raping women and teenage girls and then killing them. An excerpt from an interview with Private Paul Modelo on November 25, 1969, highlights more atrocities. Sergeant Mitchell was in charge of the whole squad and ordered his execution of the first person that they saw, which was an elderly Vietnamese man huddled in a corner. 40 to 45 men, women, children, and babies were rounded up and placed in the center of the village. Mitchell ordered his men to start shooting. Modelo shot around 67 shots from an M16 rifle into a crowd of people. Modelo thinks that he may have killed 10 to 15 civilians, men, women, children, and babies. The soldiers rounded up 7 to 8 more people, put them in a hutch, and dropped a hand grenade inside. 70 to 75 more people were pushed and shot into a ravine. There was an emphasis on the types of people killed. The interviewer made sure to enforce the idea that Modelo and other soldiers had killed babies. Ron Rittenhauer's letter describes how at the end of June 1968, Rittenhauer ran into Sergeant Larry Lacroix at the USO in Chu Lai. Lacroix had been in the 2nd Lieutenant Calley's platoon on the day the Task Force Baker swept through Pinkville. He had witnessed Calley's gunning down at least 3 separate groups of villagers. It was terrible. They were slaughtered like sheep. Calley's men were dragged into the bunkers and hutches and put together in a group. The people in the group were men, women, and children of all ages. As soon as he felt the group was big enough, Calley ordered an M16 machine gun and set it up and killed people. Lacroix said that he witnessed this procedure at least 3 times. The 3 groups were of different sizes, these being 20 people, 30 people, and 40 people. Charlie Company covered up the event, and it would have stayed that way unless Ron Rittenhauer, who found out about the event through friends who participated in it. The true events of the daily summary of March 17, 1968 would not become public until a year later. The largest reason why the My Lai massacre ended up reaching headlines was because of photographs as mentioned in the Journal of American History. Army reporter Spec J. Roberts worked with Ron Haleburl in order to cover the operation for the division newspaper. Haleburl sold his photos that he took personally for $50,000 to Life magazine. Images depicted burning houses, victims with their skulls split open, victims with their intestines spilling on the ground, and victims in burning rubble. None of the images showed the soldiers in the same frame as the victims, though. People accuse Haleburl for not stepping in to stop the killings because he would have wanted to profit off of his photos. Photos showing massacred bodies of all ages and gender, especially those of young boys and girls, stood with the public. The reason that the news outlets in America got the information was not because members involved in the My Lai massacre told news outlets, but rather the soldiers who were present but did not participate told news outlets, that being 30 out of 100 participated and 70 did not. On the more legal side, 4 officers and 9 enlisted men were charged with the massacre, while many others were not because they had left the army and weren't subject to military justice. Out of the 12 charged, 5 were tried and 4 were acquitted. Calley insisted that he was following orders from Medina, and it was the only crime that he committed when faced with the enemy was that he didn't care about his troops' lives. On March 29, 1971, a panel of 6 officers convicted Calley of the premeditated murder of Vietnamese civilians, that being 22, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. In September 1975, though, President Nixon created the sentiment that Calley was a scapegoat after Nixon paroled him and Calley got off of his charge. In the public sphere, Haleburl's pictures caused an anti-war sentiment despite others denying the photos. A survey in Minnesota showed that 49% of residents believed the story was fake, with representatives claiming how U.S. troops would never do anything like that. Life magazine claimed that the reaction amongst their readers was full of horror, shame, and shock, but also an uncaring acceptance and unnumbed lack of interest. People drew parallels to the Nazi war crimes, claiming that if the principles of the Nuremberg trials were enforced, the American soldiers couldn't hide behind the "I was just following orders" excuse. A Charlie Company soldier claimed that the massacre was just like a Nazi-type thing. and Americans were deflecting responsibility. For many of the same defense mechanisms done by American soldiers were similar to those done by Nazis when rationalizing the Holocaust. A Gallup telephone survey of Americans showed that 79% disapproved of the verdict, 81% thought that the death penalty was too harsh, and 69% thought that Calley had been made a scapegoat in response to the court cases following the massacre. Many denied the photos because the photos challenged the idea of American innocence. It would be the responsibility of American citizens to take it upon themselves to understand the My Lai massacre, as well as look at the photos and remember America's cruelty. So, after detailing the entire event, it is apparent that the My Lai massacre should be covered more in American textbooks. It is a prime example of American hypocrisy in regard to the fact that Americans pride themselves on their foreign relations and ability to help the less fortunate. This event totally disregarded that fact, as Americans valued the assistance of struggling folk, but not in the My Lai massacre. Furthermore, the act of hiding the event made it apparent that the soldiers involved knew what they were doing was wrong. This fact alone made the event all the more impactful when it hit the public because of its secrecy for about a year's time. Overall, this event shed light on the cruelty of Americans during the Vietnam War and related heavily towards dictators during that time and time earlier, comparing United States cruelty to foreign nations with, for example, Nazi cruelty and Soviet cruelty.